We're doing this in Spanish, right?
Yeah. No,
No.
Nintendo.
What?
Not this one.
¿Cómo se llama?
All righty, we can go in and get started now. We want to thank and welcome everyone for visiting TRA Marketplace 2020. My name is Ty Adams. Thank you for joining us today. This subject and session is going to be regarding the employee immigration operations. Have some exciting information coming. Please feel free to engage throughout by putting questions in the Q&A window below, and we'll make sure we get to them either during or after, but please feel free to engage with us. But without further delay, I'd like to introduce our Big Bend state sponsor, Texas Mutual.
In response to the pandemic, Texas Mutual will distribute $330 million in dividends to eligible policyholders 2 months ahead of schedule. We're also sending $2 million to nonprofits on the front lines of the COVID-19 effort. Better days are coming, but in the meantime, we'll be on the job helping Texas businesses. To learn how dividends are supporting employers in this time of need, go to texasmutual.com/dividends.
Awesome. Huge thank you and shout out again and again to Texas Mutual for being just amazing state sponsors. To kick this session off, I want to go in and get you introduced to this session's moderator, our very own Houston's own Executive Director, Melissa Stewart. Melissa.
Hi, thank you so much, Ty, and thank everyone for joining us today. I'd be remiss if I didn't immediately thank Forward.us, FWD.us. They've really been helping us here at the association address the need for immigration reform, helped us with position papers. So we're very, very thankful for their support around this issue. And when I talk about support on this issue, the two gentlemen who are joining me today are absolutely my heroes on this. Mr. Al Flores is our current chapter president here for the Houston chapter, as well as sitting on the Texas Restaurant Association Executive Committee. He's a PAC trustee, but in his full-time job, beyond all his many, many volunteer work, he is the general counsel for Gringo's Mexican Kitchen and Jimmy Changa's. Excuse me. Al has his Bachelor of Science from the University of Houston and his law degrees from the Texas Southern University. He is a passionate immigration advocate, and he has done so many different things for the community, both in his professional life as well as what he takes care of on his personal time. And he's going to be a great asset to talk with us today. And when we're talking about assets in the realm of immigration, we would absolutely could not have that conversation in Texas, or certainly not in Houston, without talking about Jacob Monty. Jake and I have gone way back, and I'm so thankful for all the work he's done, and not just an advocate for his customers and clients, but through the authorship of his books, his tireless dedication to getting good information out, protecting people. He does work all over the United States as well as into Mexico and other parts of the world. He and his team are absolutely great partners. They've been great partners for the Texas Restaurant Association, and their availability to our members has absolutely been amazing around the issue of immigration. He always has his finger on the pulse. And we are so thankful to have both of these gentlemen joining us today to talk about immigration, and specifically from an employer standpoint. And I want to just throw out a couple of facts, if y'all will forgive some of my reading. When we talk about immigrants and foreign-born workers, here in the restaurant segment, we probably have in excess of 2.5 million foreign-born workers in our segment. Excuse me. That's about 10% of the overall foreign-born workers that are here in America. And a couple of things that I think are always great to point out is that it's not just our foreign-born workers working at our quick service restaurants. That's only about 20% of that population of workforce. But actually, almost half of our chefs and 25% of our management teams are from foreign-born workers and immigrants. And that's what makes our food scene so amazing. If we were all the same from the same place and we all had the same abuela, it wouldn't be all that much fun. So we are really lucky to have so many different flavors and tastes and personalities to make our restaurant scene vibrant, especially here in Houston, the most diverse city in America. So with all of that, this is an absolute passion project of mine. We want to make sure we're doing it the right way. I'm going to turn it over to Jacob for some opening remarks.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for your comments, and proud to be here with Al Flores, who I've worked with for many years. There's a lot happening on the immigration front. You know, employers have it so hard because you have to take the I-9 seriously. You have to make sure that you complete it. It's a 2-page form now. It has been around for more than 33 years, but employers are still messing up on it. And ICE is still there to catch us and fine us if we mess up on the I-9. So that is one thing I just want to reiterate. The I-9 is easy to mess up on, and we really recommend that you go through and do a self-audit of your I-9s, because you can save yourself money, and you have to get that right. The other thing that we're seeing is employers try to do the right thing. No one goes out, I believe, and legitimately tries to hire undocumented workers. The problem is there are fake documents out there that look good, and employers, we're not document experts. So it's a fine line. If you reject a document that you think is fake and it turns out to be good, you're looking at a discrimination lawsuit and a big PR nightmare. We have retired ICE agents that work with our firm, and they're fooled sometimes by the quality of the fake documents. So it's easy to mess up. The rule of thumb that I always say is you are not document experts, but you are held to the reasonable 8th grader standard. So look at the document. If Texas is misspelled, that's a sign it's not a good document. If department, as in Department of Public Safety, is misspelled, that's a bad document. But the good news or bad news, depending on how you look at it, is that the quality of the fake documents in Houston is pretty good, in Texas for that matter. But if you do happen to notice a misspelling, don't accept it. Also, we don't normally see bad examples like this in Texas, but I recently saw 2 people in one photo. Okay, that's an indication that it's fake. 2 people in one photo is not a good document. But oftentimes, it's not so easy to spot the fake document. Another issue that employers need to be aware about is what happens when you get information from an outside entity that says that this person may be undocumented, or maybe their social security number does not match with their name. We're starting to see more and more of this. Just recently, when employers file their new hire reporting data with the Texas Attorney General, they have, within the last 3 weeks, they've started to get a feedback that tells the employer, hey, this name doesn't match with this social security number. They weren't doing that before. And this is causing some headaches for employers that are freaking out. Our position on this is that this is not information from the Department of Homeland Security. It's not information from the Social Security Administration. It's from the Texas Attorney General's office. So, you know, our advice is that you don't have to terminate individuals that have this indication, but it does reiterate how important it is to make sure that your I-9s are in good order. Another issue that comes up beginning last year, we started to see no-match Social Security notices for the first time in 12 years. Al, you and I have talked about no matches before, and you know, we had a holiday, we didn't have to deal with them, but you know, beginning last year, they started to reemerge. I didn't hear that because of COVID, I guess we got a reprieve. I don't think no matches were issued this year, but they did cause a lot of concern for employers. And what do we do in this situation? Look, on no matches, we tell employers, the very notice from the Social Security Administration says that you don't have to terminate the people, that you should not terminate the people. So we recommend you follow the Social Security guidance. Don't terminate the people, but you do have to engage in what the IRS calls the solicitation process. And we have a memo that we're happy to share with anyone. All it says is you share, you have to send the employee a notice telling them that they have a no match notice and encouraging them to solve the problem. And if you do that, you've met your obligation under the IRS and Social Security rules. But those are the big issues. The last thing I want to mention that is probably the most important thing you can do to prevent you from getting on ICE's radar screen is handle situations that I call innocent bystander victims of identity theft. This is happening a lot. This is how it works. Some lady from Scranton, Pennsylvania calls and says, hey, I've never worked at your restaurant. I've never even been to Midland, Odessa, but yet you are reporting revenue to my Social Security number. Can you solve the problem? I had a case recently where this company ignored this lady. She called 19 times. The lady ended up getting her pastor involved. Her pastor ended up getting the congressman involved. The congressman in Pennsylvania ended up getting ICE involved. We ended up with a full-blown ICE investigation because the employer didn't return the lady's telephone call. And you can understand the situation from her, you know, she was getting kicked out of her government housing project because they saw that she was earning too much money. The company had a great opportunity to solve the problem for that innocent bystander victim of identity theft. And how do you solve the problem? Call her back. Find out if that employee, if you're going to have to get her number, and then find out if that employee still works for you. If he still works for you, you're going to have to interview him. If he admits that he's not using the proper number, you're going to have to terminate him unless he has a new number. And then here's the most important part. You're going to have to file an amended W-2C report letting the Social Security Administration and the IRS know that you reported revenue to that number erroneously. If the company would have done that, we would have avoided the ICE NOI audit altogether, and we would have avoided a lot of disruption and a fine. So I encourage employers to take situations like that seriously. It is tough out there for employers, and that's what I'll say.
That's a good start. That gets us going. Al, I know you've taken in your role as general counsel, you had to handle a lot of issues for y'all's employees at Gringos and Chimichangas. Could you just share some of your experiences as an employer around the issue of having foreign-born workers?
Sure, absolutely. First of all, thank you, Melissa, and glad we're able to be here for our members. As Jacob said, just briefly, we depend on immigrant workforce here throughout the United States, and specifically in Texas. The work ethic is very important, and so to us, and so that's something that's it's a grueling job to work in these kitchens, and specifically in our restaurants with high pace and the volume and so forth. But with our particular restaurant, some of the biggest issues, of course, we have several DACA employees, and the majority of those DACA employees, probably 90%, are seeking some type of further higher education. Many are in college. And so some of the issues in particular really are more human issue in the sense that they're constantly worried of their renewal process. Are they going to get approved again? What's going to happen to their parents? So it's very difficult when you say human, you put a human side to that face and understand their issues, that they're going through a lot. And so immigration reform is certainly needed. But other issues, to Jacob's point, of course, the I-9s are very important. I-9s, while we're not required to be experts in documentation, and they can tell us what documents to produce, whether it's in column A, B, or C, we're not supposed to tell them, you've got to produce this form of identification. As Jacob says, as long as we verify that those documents appear to be legitimate based on without being experts, that's all we're required to do. We can't discriminate against someone for refusing to hire their hire them based on the documentation. So those are issues that are very important. But there's so many other issues, but that's initially some of the concerns we have.
That's great. Thank you, Al. So Jacob, I guess I want to bounce back to you for just a second, because we're talking about I-9s, and that's sort of that first place where you can get into trouble. And a lot of our conversations when we're talking with employers, and operators, it's really focused on not having attention brought on you from the government. But could you just spend a few minutes and help us understand what the employee or the potential employee could do if we don't handle setting up their I-9 correctly? Because I think there's liability on both sides. So Jacob, could you just walk us through some of those challenges?
Absolutely. Well, Al alluded to it. The I-9 is easy to mess up on. But let's talk about DACA. DACA currently has a 2-year work authority period. It was just reduced to 1 year by the administration, but we haven't seen how that's going to roll out yet because there's litigation. But so a DACA, you would have to renew that. The employer would have to verify that the employee has gotten a renewal within 2 years. Sounds simple, right? Well, what about a permanent resident alien card? That also has an expiration. It's a 10-year expiration. Do you have to renew, ask the employee to show you a new card when his previous card expires? No. And many employers are asking employees to renew, to show that they have renewed their permanent resident alien card, and that's a discrimination act. You can get fined for it. So it's not only that you have to comply with the I-9 and complete it properly to make sure that ICE is not on your back, but you also have to avoid going too far and engaging in document abuse. And it's easy to do. Panda Express settled a nationwide case for over $500,000, all because they routinely asked permanent resident alien holders to provide evidence that their cards had been renewed, and that was discriminatory. So the I-9 is easy to mess up on. You have to be careful. You can't go overboard, but yet you can't disregard it either. Otherwise, ICE is coming down on you. So it is tough. Employers are really caught with this catch-22 situation. You have to be careful. You can't go overboard, though. I just can't stress that enough.
So with that idea, how often would you recommend to clients that they do an I-9 audit or an update? What's sort of the best practices around that?
You all should be doing your I-9 audit internally at least once a year, and that is at a minimum, at least once a year. If some folks are having outside lawyers or consultants do it, that's fine too. But initially, you should do that I-9 audit. And remember, if you find an error with the I-9, that's easy to correct. You go back, correct it in red ink, never backdate a document. You want to show that you weren't perfect the first times, but you learned and made the correction. That enables you to take advantage of the good faith defense. One thing that an old ICE agent told me a while back is if he sees perfect I-9s, he knows that they weren't completed truthfully when they should have been completed. It's normal to see some mistakes there. No one is perfect, so bear that in mind. You can make a mistake, but you can correct it with red ink. Never backdate a document.
Excellent. And one thing I've learned from you is that there is a Spanish language I-9, but that can only be used in Puerto Rico. And I think that's one that I could see us making a really easy mistake on.
Great point, Melissa. Many employers fall for that easy to fall for error. The Spanish I-9 is only valid in Puerto Rico. So you can use the Spanish I-9 as a guide to help the employee complete the I-9, but all of the forms have to be in English. Great point.
That's a challenge because we speak so many languages, and Spanish is only one of them. We start, as soon as we get past Spanish, we've got 50 other languages here in Houston alone, much less as we go across the United States. So let's talk a little bit. DACA is such a huge thing, and Al, I know that is a passion that you follow, the DACA and the TPS. Al, I'm going to toss this one to you first. If DACA and TPS recipients were forced out of the workforce, what would that mean? What would that look like for y'all's organization?
Yeah, that would have a huge impact economically, not only throughout the state of Texas, but the country. I mean, I think there's almost 1 million DACA students out there. And it's not just the students, but the entire family network that many of them are employed as well. So that would be a huge impact on us. We have about 20% employees that are DACA recipients and DACA students. And so, this is something that we have to really be wary of, something that we have to be cognizant of, because again, these DACA students are working hard within the company, but they're still in limbo. They're still having to renew their lives every 2 years, in this case, every year, until all that gets settled out ultimately with the courts. And it's just a very stressful situation to be in. And so, but it would have a tremendous impact on us, absolutely.
Jacob, same question. What do you see from your other clients? Because I know, like I said, I know you're nationwide.
Well, eliminating DACA would kill the restaurant industry, primarily because it's a big number, it's a big percentage, but it also will implicate managers, back of the house managers, front of the house managers. It will implicate key people. It's not just losing bodies, it's bodies that you are really relying on. And certainly in our industry, in the construction industry as well. So these people are embedded in our industry, in our economy, and losing them would be devastating. Hopefully we'll get some compromise once the election is done, and maybe there'll be a lame duck session to deal with DACA. We did get a good decision from the Supreme Court, but yet the administration is dragging their feet on implementing that decision, and they've indicated that they want to continue to cancel the DACA executive order. So ultimately, Congress is going to have to step up and solve this. There does appear to be bipartisan support for DACA, so we just got to get them to do their job. But right now, everyone's focused on the election, of course.
This is true. So one thing that I've learned from talking with you and Al is that not only is the paperwork really cumbersome, it's something, as somebody who was born here, I've never had to go through all that paperwork, and I understand it's really intense, but it's very expensive. It's about $500 to apply for your DACA paperwork. Is that correct?
Exactly.
And that's every 2 years. And then right now they're trying to make it every year. So that's a big chunk of change, I think, for anybody.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little, DACA has been such a prominent conversation, but we also have another really kind of endangered group of workers when we start talking about the TPS folks. Can you tell us a little bit about who are they and what's been going on with their status? Because I think there's been some jeopardies around that as well, sir.
Well, TPS is going to implicate Salvadorians, Nicaraguans. It's temporary protected status. It also includes people from Sudan. This is also about 400,000 people nationwide, and they are also very embedded in our economies. And I know this industry, without Salvadorian workers, everyone, of course, the assumption is everyone's Mexican. Well, a lot of us are Mexican, but a lot of us are Salvadorian too. And the Salvadorian worker is really important to the Texas economy. TPS did get an extension until next year, so we're not facing the crisis that DACA was facing. But TPS also has to be addressed. These are people that have been here for more than 20 years. They've been vetted. They're not criminals. Many of the TPS people have U.S. citizens that are children. So again, the low-hanging fruit when we start talking about immigration reform is definitely DACA and TPS, because we already know who they are. They've been vetted. They're already working. They deserve a permanent solution.
As just to follow up on what Jacob said, as many of those TPS folks, of course, they've got their proper documentation to work here. Many of them work throughout the country, throughout the state. And in this 20 years or so they've been here, they have children now that are citizens. They have children that are working with many times the same company. So that entire fabric of network of families that are working throughout the industry, especially the hospitality industry. Because I think it's pretty well known between the construction industry and the hospitality industry, that's the majority of immigrants in many cases throughout the country. So when you have that fabric of families that are now working within the industry and their life is in balance, waiting for these decisions and renewals, that's the human aspect of it it can be very troubling as well.
What do you think the mood is, Al? I know through your work, both professionally and then on a personal level, I know you do a lot of work to support immigrants and refugees. So what is the mood that you're seeing? What's happening out there, just to kind of catch us up?
Yeah, so I've talked to folks in other companies who, let's say, who are undocumented, and yet they've been working here for years. The biggest concern, the biggest worry they have is they can't get a driver's license. So they're literally, you have to drive to and from work. So every day they get in their car and they take that journey to their place of employment. That's one of the biggest worries, because they're afraid if they get stopped, and they're the breadwinner of that family, that they're on a long journey back home and their family's pretty much here on their own. And so that's the feeling of embarrassment, the worry to get stopped because they don't have the proper documentations to go back and forth to their employment is a huge factor for many of the folks I've talked to.
Well, and that's a big thing right now, because when we're looking at the pandemic, the public transportation options are really not what they would typically be. And so, and we also know that when we look at our frontline workers, our clerks, our restaurant workers, a lot of our foreign-born workers are essential employees. And so you match that up with no public transportation or limited public transportation and the driver's license. Driver's license is actually an interesting thing because that's something that is actually an immigration issue that we can address at a state level. And I think that's something a lot of times we don't always talk about when we're talking about immigration reform and changes that we can make, is we just consider it all very federal. We say, oh, it's all got to go to DC, it's got to happen there. But there's actually things like that, like the driver's license issue, that we can impact and talk to our state officials on that would have a big impact and could really help a lot of our folks from a safety and security standpoint as we go forward. And so those are things that I think we're always looking for is, how do we talk to all of our elected officials about these members of our community?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Melissa, you're absolutely right on that. California has issued over 2 million driver's licenses to undocumented, and it's working. You at least know who they are. They get insurance easier. I mean, we often look to Washington, but that's a solution that we could have here in Texas.
Right.
New Mexico does it. A lot of other states have done it, and it actually helps the driving public as well, because who's behind the wheel.
Yeah,
absolutely. And especially with insurance, because I know many years ago my husband was broadsided, and it was somebody who was undocumented and they didn't have insurance. It was a terrible ripple effect. One thing led to another that made a bad situation all the worse, unfortunately. So I'll put this out to both of y'all, but what behaviors have you seen change with DACA? When it came out, it felt like this kind of relief, like, okay, I've got a plan. And then it's been up in air and, just sort of, I guess, 18 months, give or take, maybe a little bit more, has been really uncertain. What are you seeing with the folks who are either under that status or maybe they're undocumented or a member of their family is undocumented? I know that's actually a big thing too, is maybe it's not the worker's native born, no problems, but somebody in their household does not have proper documentation. Jacob, talk to me. What's the stressors? What are you hearing from that community?
Well, most undocumented people have someone in their family who is documented. So definitely you're talking about mixed status family. There's a lot of fear. Al mentioned it. Driving is the biggest fear. I've driven with undocumented people. They drive so slow. They're so paranoid about making a left turn improperly. It's really sad. Not to get political, but it'd be easy to blame Donald Trump for deporting everyone. Really, the entity that has deported most people has been the whole drinking and driving. You need to talk to your employees. Don't drink and drive, because when they come to see me or Al and when they've already have the DWI and they're not documented, it's really hard to keep them in the country. And that one idea of drinking and driving has been devastating for the immigrant community. There is fear out there also. The community is optimistic, but they are fearful. The other thing that is a problem is notario fraud. Notaries in Mexico are like judges, and oftentimes your employees will want to hire a notary here, but we all know that a notary public is not a lawyer. You know, it's just someone who paid $100 to the state and got a stamp. So be careful. Let your employees know. The other thing I would say is every restaurant needs to have a good criminal defense lawyer to give to their employees and a good immigration lawyer to give to their employees, because sometimes they'll get scammed by lawyers. They'll go to the wrong criminal defense lawyer, and for an immigrant, they can't plead guilty to certain crimes. Otherwise, it's an automatic deportation. So they have to fight the case here. So there's some struggles I just wanted to share.
No, that's really helpful. So I think that's one of the things that when we're talking about employers and what you can do, it is important to make sure that our most vulnerable community members and employees, that we have some options for them. You know, workforce has not gotten any easier during the pandemic. I know there's many, many people who are unemployed, but I also know we have a lot of jobs that are not going filled. That's not a new problem, and I don't think it's going to change as we go forward. Let me just pivot a minute, and Al, I'm going to toss this to you just as a kind of a general thing, because I know you've dealt with this, and then we'll have Jacob weigh in. But if you have somebody show up or send you an audit letter, kind of what are some of the things that you can do as the employer? What are some of your immediate rights? Because I know that's very scary, no matter who sends it, whether it's the IRS or ICE, that's a scary thing. So Al, if you'll start us off telling us about kind of what your rights are as an employer, and then Jacob will have you weigh in.
Yeah, absolutely. So when those audit letters come in, obviously at the very beginning, we're talking about the E-Verify, for example, right? Are we talking about when the audit letters come in? Yeah. So when the audit letter comes in, the very first thing is to check to make sure that that information is correct, because a lot of times there were some glitches in a lot of those government programs that information was not being properly funneled down. And so before you just automatically terminate anybody, you've got to really investigate that. Obviously, we would get the employee involved, talk to the employee, and try to get to the bottom of what the situation is. But yeah, it can be very dicey, because that's something that you've got to kind of weigh both sides. You can't continue to hire a person, obviously, if you're put on notice that the Social Security number is incorrect. At the same time, we got to make sure that information we're getting from the government is correct, because at the onset had been a lot of glitches in that program. We were getting misinformation. So it's very
That's
dicey.
been one of the real concerns with E-Verify, is that a lot of folks really like it, but it's also not as robust as it really needs to be. If we ramp up, it's
Right.
hard to get off it if you're starting to have problems with it and it's causing you trouble.
Right.
So Jacob, if an employer gets a letter that somebody's going to come in and want to audit their files, how long do they have to respond? What's sort of the first steps they should be taking?
Well, on an I-9 audit, you have 72 hours, and that 72 hours is very important, because you really need to have a lawyer help you with this. And you can make changes to the I-9s, make corrections to the I-9s during that 72-hour period. Again, as long as you do so in red ink, date, never backdated document. But oftentimes I see employers, they don't take advantage of that 72-hour period to make changes to the I-9s. And then they end up with a huge fine that could have been mitigated had they used the 72 hours wisely.
Al, do you have any other advice as an employer when you get letters from somebody wanting to come in and check files or stuff? I know you've dealt with some of these things in your private practice and stuff before.
Yeah. So, well, in particular, for example, with particular, let's say just raids or even just visits by ICE to your restaurant. I know, because that's come up before. First of all, without a subpoena, really you don't have to let them in, but of course they'll get a subpoena ultimately. But I think that what's happened up here, a lot of restaurateurs talk about that they've been visited by ICE in their restaurant. And it's very intimidating, obviously, because they're very demanding, that they want to speak to all of these employees. They want to start questioning these employees. And generally I tell them without a subpoena, really, they can't do that. And, you know, they'll have to, and generally you can talk to the supervisor in charge and make arrangements to provide the information they want without them in front of your customers, disrupting the entire dining room. But that's some of the things I've heard of recently.
Jacob, what would you advise if somebody has ICE show up on their doorstep? What's sort of the immediate thing to do to not make the situation worse?
Well, look, and I think Al's alluded to it already. Number one, look at the document, talk to them. A lot of times, if ICE shows up, they may not be looking for all of your employees and to conduct a full audit. Maybe they're there for one criminal alien who they're looking for. And if you engage in a dialogue and they're here for one person and they have documents verifying that they need to talk to that one person, I don't have a problem letting them do that, because if you can get them out of there fast, that's good. And it protects all of the other employees. I mean, remember, ICE has limited resources also. Sometimes they might be going for one fugitive, one criminal alien, but you have to find out by talking to them. On the other hand, as Al said, if they're coming to do a full-blown investigation of the company, you should insist on a subpoena, talk to a supervisor, get a lawyer involved, because you do have rights, and you should stand on your rights. Also, the government's not going to think you're guilty because you hire a lawyer. They're going to think you're smart. I mean, hiring a lawyer is normal. Sometimes I think clients wonder, well, will I look guilty if I don't hire a lawyer? No, I think, you know, the answer is no.
Well, just to follow up on what Jacob said, I think the resources are somewhat slim in a sense, but I think it was the raid in Mississippi, Morton, Mississippi, where they really went after, I think, nearly 1,000 individuals, 600 and something individuals, and they arrested all of those folks. And so I think they tend to go to once they do their background investigation and find that there could be rampant hiring of undocumented workers, I think they'll tend to pick anyway some of the larger facilities where they can get a bigger catch because their resources are thin. But it's not unheard of for restaurants, again, to be visited unannounced by ICE. And so I'm just saying, as Jacob says, if they have a specific warrant for an individual, obviously you have to honor that. But you know, just letting them voluntarily sit down with your employees is never a good idea. That could open up all kinds of other issues. So just be
I think that's probably a piece of advice that and Jacob, you alluded to as much, but I think one of the things that we're always concerned with is by putting out our rights as an employer, as a private business, and saying, no, I need the paperwork, or no, you may not just come in and randomly speak to whatever employees on a fishing expedition,
Right.
that's causing more trouble. But in the end, you know, you really can help prevent some of the threads from being pulled that they didn't know were there. And that's one thing, Jacob, I think you've talked about this before, is just making sure your front of the house team knows if these situations come up, if somebody shows up to do any kind of audit, ADA, IR, anything like that, what's the plan of action? What they don't let them make it up on the scene. Don't trust their judgment in a very scary situation. And so that's probably one thing that I think we need to make sure is that our team knows how to react if folks show up.
Absolutely. Have a protocol, who to call once any government official shows up. Look at the documents, take a picture of it, send it to headquarters, send it to the owner, send it to a lawyer. I mean, you have to, they're going to expect to wait a period of time and, sit them down so that they're not, in plain sight, get them some water or coffee, and don't feel like you have to act immediately. I often see employers that think, well, I just had to start getting files out. No, I mean, time is on your side. Take the necessary time, look at the document, get some expert consults. That's where the TRA comes in, because the TRA has counsel on staff. They also have affiliated law firms like ours that help them. So this is where you rely on the TRA, because the TRA is a great source for that kind of emergency information.
Right. And that's one of the things we know for our operators. You wear so many hats. There's so many things you're trying to be expert at, when really what you wanted to do was have this really fun restaurant and use your grandmother's recipes and, visit people. So I think that's really good advice that I hope everyone who's listening will take into heart, is you don't have to be an expert at everything, and know when you need to stop and get the experts, because This is very nuanced. Like you said, even a simple criminal case that for anybody else, if the shoplifting and whatever could have huge ramifications if we start putting in our foreign-born workers. We know that when we've had situations in natural disasters where we've had curfews, that's been really challenging on our foreign-born workers because they don't want to be stopped. They don't want to, there's a fear, and it's not necessarily because of anything for that person. They just don't want to open the door to their home, and possibly have other folks, having some stress there. We're coming up on our last few minutes, but Al, you told me a beautiful story of somebody who you really helped with some paperwork. I think it was an employee's daughter. Could you tell us about all the things that you did with her and where she's at and her school and all that? Because we talk about the scary stuff, but I really would like to share some of the great things that happened.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of stories, but the one I'm thinking of is this young lady who's she's a DACA student, and she is about to graduate from the University of Texas, straight A student, and she's on her way to medical school. But as Jacob said, many of these families are mixed statuses, and in the interim, her parents are driving with no driver's license and are worried every day. She's worried every day. Frankly, I don't know how she can study and maintain that GPA. I know I couldn't do it. So my hat's really off to her, and I try to encourage her that eventually we will have immigration reform and we'll get those issues resolved. Another individual that is a citizen who sponsored her parents. And I went through that process, and I had the opportunity to go down to Juarez, Jacob, while it was still open. And I went down there just to see firsthand how the process worked. It was interesting. The consulate's down there, and you got hotels, a whole industry built around the consulate. Yeah. And you see these people go get their shots, and it's to me it's kind of a racket, because even though they have all their vacunas, all their medical record shots, they still have to take additional shots. It doesn't matter. You're going to pay.
The doctor who has the contract with the consulate has to get paid, right?
Of course. So you're gonna pay for some additional shots, but that's okay. It doesn't matter at that point. And then your fingerprints, going with them to the fingerprint office, and then when you go with them, actually you walk them to the actual interview at the embassy. Of course, we can't go in, but it was just an exciting process. But then at the end of the day, when they initially got denied because they alleged to be a public charge, well, that was the fly in the ointment, until we went back to show that the sponsor was making sufficient income. A job was waiting for them when they got here. We threw in additional information, and thank goodness, maybe about a month or so later, they were able to get approved. But it's just those kinds of dynamics that are just living on the edge in many cases, really tough. Yeah.
Jacob, I know you work with some fantastic folks. Do you have a story that you can share with us about something that took some effort but really ended up going well?
Well, it hasn't gone well yet, but it's a story about optimism. This lady came in, I guess it was in April, and she had my old business card from 1999, and she said, "I've been, getting your email updates, but I just wanted to. You said immigration reform was going to happen, soon, and maybe 2000, and I know 9/11 derailed it." I thought she was going to be mad at me because I told her in 99 that immigration reform was, on its way. She said, "I know it'll come eventually. Don't worry. And when it does happen, I'm going to come here." I've moved offices like 3 times. She's kept up with everywhere I've gone. And she said, "I just want you to know I've been saving my money," because she wanted to hire me in 99. I said, "There's nothing I can do for you." But I was inspired by her because she's optimistic. I mean, the immigrant is optimistic. No matter what's happening, they read about the wall, the kids in cages, whatever. They see the positive. Things are just about to get better. And I think that's what inspires me to be able to work with immigrants, because they are so optimistic. And sometimes native-born folks like us, we sometimes get down and discouraged, but the immigrants will keep us energized, and they'll keep us optimistic. And I'm sure that we will get comprehensive immigration reform, maybe not all in one fell swoop, but at least let's start with the DACA and the TPS folks, and then we can start working with the other people that have been here for a long time, and then maybe even a visa program for our hospitality industry, that because we need workers more than ever.
We absolutely do. And we are just about out of time. And thank you both for being here. The truth of it is, as we know, easily 10% of our workforce is foreign born. And then it gets even, when we start looking at the different types of our workers, our critical workers, the chefs, the front of the house, the managers, we have a long legacy of foreign born and immigrant people in our industry. They are our absolute backbone. I'm with you, Jacob. I'm going to have the optimism that we're getting close to something. And just, be aware of, as an employer, we know you need workforce. There are many, many people who you can employ, our DACAs, our TPS folks. Just get some help if you're confused. Don't be shady. We don't need that. But we're here as a great resource for that. And we know that it's just an exciting time and there's lots to be done still. And we will be coming out to all of our members and using our partners as we find things, as we find opportunities to advocate. We'll be letting you know what they are. And if you need anything, please reach out. I've put my email address in the chat box. Excuse me. I'm happy to connect you with anyone. And just let's work together and take care of our teams, because they are out there taking care of us. Al, did you have any last words?
No, that's it. I mean, just like Jacob says, that just encourage them to keep that optimism, because it is coming. And I've had the fortunate experience to go to some of these citizen swearing in ceremonies, and it's amazing. You get to see people from all over the world to take that oath. So it's worth it.
That's awesome. Jacob, any last words?
No, just keep helping TRA, and we will get there. And that's the great thing about this industry is we are so welcoming to immigrants and to women, and it really is inspiring, because there really are no glass ceilings for immigrants or for women in this industry. It's really wide open, and it's great to see that.
We were excited for it. We know we're 1 in 3 people were their first job, and about 1 in 10 where are their job. And so we're really excited to hold that up. Thank everyone for participating and listening today. If you're listening live, I want to remind you to join us at 7 o'clock tonight for our wind down. We're going to have some industry awards, and then the Big Ben stage is open again tomorrow for our last day of Marketplace. Lots of great stuff. Thank you everyone who's participated. Jacob, Al, from my heart, I love this topic and everything we can do on this. Thank you for everything. And I look forward to all the good things we're going to get going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.